Other areas to break continuity could be wardrobe or color or simply background action or distractions. One of the best ways to ensure that continuity is consistent is to repeat the action exactly the same way from one take to the next. One of the techniques that we use is something called overlapping action. By overlapping or repeating the action and editing those two shots together, it creates a seamless flow of action for the audience. Our next C of cinematography is camera angles. One of the most dynamic and visual challenges that a director of photography may have, or a cameraman or a director, is where to place the lens. Camera angles is something that really controls the dynamic visual stimuli for the audience. By putting the camera in specific places, it can create a sense of involvement, emotion, and has quite an impact to the audience. We'll learn a little bit more about camera placement and camera angles later, so let's move on to the next cinematography C. That would be close-ups. One of the most dynamic tools that the director has is the close-up. It allows the audience to get a sense of involvement with the character or to instill a sense of emotion.
He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul.
Many people think that the camera operator's position is one of the easiest jobs on set. In fact, the camera operator has quite a bit of responsibility because there are so many things going on inside the frame, and the simplest mistake reads big on the screen. Our next C in cinematography is composition. Composition is simply the arrangement of the subject and the action within the frame. Sometimes to achieve that, it becomes quite a challenge for the operator because you have to work around what we call bogeys in the frame. For instance, if you zoom out you'll see some of the obstacles that we have to work with: the microphone, the C or century stand within the frame. Now, if we zoom back and recompose our shot, we find that keeping up with the action a lot of times requires the camera to always be moving and trying to keep up with what's going on, something I call ABC, always be composing. That means if the action goes to the right or to the left, you have to quickly make a decision as to how you want to compose the shot. Sometimes if the action is moving within the frame and you know that the action is going to come back to the center of the frame, then you may decide to keep the frame locked. For instance, if the action moves to the right, to the left, like a boxing match, and settles back into position, then locking the frame is something that works really well. On the other hand, sometimes moving the camera with the action is the best thing. Sometimes that's an aesthetic choice that's made by the camera operator or the director. And sometimes it's just something that happens at the last moment and you just have to be instinctive in making a decision.
Next time, duck. Like the chicken you are.
That makes no sense. On a pure poultry level.
Hey, Jimmy Olsen, no one's talking to you.
Now, one of the rules that we apply in composition is something that we call the rule of thirds. In the rule of thirds, you want to allow not more than 2/3 of the frame for the action of the subject, and 1/3 of the frame for something we call leading space. Now, the leading space is something that helps establish the direction in which the action is going.
Yeah, well, he was the only one that was marked.
Yeah, I heard the story before. Do yourself a favor, turn around and go home.
We'll learn a lot more about composition and framing at a later date, but we want to move on now to our next C, which is cutting. One of the most amazing things is that now that we live in an age where we can edit what we shoot, cutting is something that is very important. And essentially, it involves all of the other 4 C's of cinematography. So if you study the other 4 C's of cinematography and apply all of the principles and things that we've learned up to this point, then cutting is something that will be very easy for you. Now that brings us to my job, the director of photography. Now, generally the director of photography is ultimately responsible for the visual look of the film and works collaboratively with the director in taking the words from the script and transforming it into the visual story on the screen. So now that we have a basic understanding about the fundamentals of cinematography, let's apply it to a real-world scenario. We're here in Beijing, China, for the next Bigfoot movie, which is called Love Stinks. So we're going to incorporate what we've learned up to this point. So before we start shooting, the first area that we're going to focus on is pre-production. So the main thing, most of his guys, you know, it's fine. I mean, I think the only person that just has to check out, as far as me, I know that I didn't think he had any experience.
We'll be starting always in the same location that we were originally starting in, which is the writer's room.
我们还是先从那个上次那种2重情感 3。
Rehearse, please. 彩排 ready. Action.